Hello guys, you're welcome to uComputing's YouTube channel. My name is Eugene. Today we're going to talk about Active Directory Domain Services. We're going to first of all talk about what ADDS is, the requirement for deploying ADDS, and I'll take you through the installation procedure and how you can configure ADDS step by step right from scratch. Now, what is ADDS? Active Directory Domain Services is one of the several roles that we have on Windows Server operating systems. It's a network service that allows IT pros to manage users and computers. Basically, this network service helps us verify credentials of users and computers that are trying to access resources on a Windows domain environment. Okay, that seems to be lengthy, but basically what ADDS does is that it performs authentication and authorization, right? Checking and making sure anybody that is accessing a resource, whether it's a web server or a file server or a print server, whatever it is, on a domain environment has the right credentials before he or she can access, right? Now, let's have a look at the prerequisites for deploying ADDS. Surprisingly, you don't need so much requirement to deploy ADDS. Okay, you need a minimum just 250 megabyte hard disk space on your server operating system, and then you also need a storage that is formatted with an NTFS file system, right? The storage that is going to host the Active Directory database files, right? And then you also need a DNS server role on your network or on the same machine. So you don't necessarily need a DNS server to be running on a PC or a server that is going to run your ADDS. You just need it to be somewhere on the network, right? So on a network which you're going to deploy your ADDS, you have to just make sure you have a DNS server on premises, right? But in our scenario, we're going to put our ADDS and our DNS server on the same machine. So I'll take you through the whole procedure, starting from setting IP addresses to installing DNS before we put the ADDS on top of it. Now, if your DNS server configuration is bad, installing ADDS is going to be a problem. Now, when you install Active Directory Domain Services on any machine, the machine is no longer referred to as a member server, but a domain controller. So basically, a domain controller is a server or a system that is running Active Directory Domain Services. So we have one system that we're going to give it a host name of DC1, right? And then set an IP address. All this configuration on the screen will be set for this machine. So we're going to give it an IP address of 10.0.0.1, which is a Class C IP version 4 address, and a subnet mask of 255.0.0.0. And additionally, because we're going to run our DNS name resolution system on the same machine, we're going to use the same machine's IP address as the preferred DNS, right? That is the reason why the IP address of this server is going to be the same as its preferred DNS, right? If you don't have your DNS server on the same machine, or your name resolution system is running on another system, that system's IP address will have to take the place of either preferred DNS or alternate DNS, right? So this is the IP configuration you're going to use. If you want to follow along, you can set the same thing for your machine. All right, now let's get started. So as you can see, I'm having a Windows Server 2019 operating system running on my system right now. This is a new installation. I have not deployed anything on it yet, so everything is going to be done from scratch. Now, I'm going to log in here by pressing the Ctrl-Alt-Insert key. If you're using a virtual machine, that is the key combination you have to use. If you're doing it on a physical machine, you just press Ctrl-Alt-Delete as it was written on the screen. Now, I'm going to log in here. My password. This is just a workgroup machine. It's not running any network service. Okay, so IPs always comes first when it comes to network configuration. I always advise my students that when you're facing a network challenge or a networking issue, the first thing you should check is the IP address. Whether you are doing maintenance or whether you are doing the configuration from scratch, IPs always comes first. So I'm going to just access the network connections console. I'm going to use the Windows key plus R to launch my run prompt, right? And I'm going to type this command to access the network connections console, ncpa.cpl. Okay, this is quick for me. I don't really like the clicking too much. The commands work faster for me, right? So I'm going to press enter here. It takes me straight to the network connections console. I'm going to right click on this network adapter here, go to properties, And over here we have IP version 4, IP version 6 configuration. I'm going to go for IP version 4. Click properties here and switch the through button to use the following IP addresses. As you saw in the previous slide that I showed you, you're going to use 10.0.0.1. My new log is off. So 10.0.0.1 class C IP with a subnet mask 255.0.0.0. And then I'm not going to give any default gateway. I'm going to just click on preferred DNS address here and use the same IP address 10.0.0.1 as a preferred DNS address, because the DNS service on this network is going to be on the same machine, this very machine. That is why I'm using this IP address here. You need to understand that. Okay, so I'm going to go OK here, click close here, and then the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to just go to Server Manager. You can launch Server Manager from the Start menu. This is Server Manager. It's also pinned to the taskbar sometimes, so you can also get it from here. Now, you can use the local server option here to see the current host configurations and settings for this machine. And as you can see, we have an IP address of 10.0.0.1 here, but the host name is messed up. I don't want to use this host name. From the slide, you said we're going to use DC1. So I'm going to click here and click on change and change the name to DC1, right? DC1 in block letters, right? Now, because of the DNS server, I'm going to give it something that we call a DNS suffix. I'm going to give a DNS suffix to this server, right? I'm going to click on these more options over here and then type in here a primary DNS suffix. Okay, the primary DNS suffix is going to be the same DNS zone name I will use to configure my DNS, and it's going to be the same name I'm going to use to set up my Active Directory domain. Whatever domain name you want to use is fine, but it has to be consistent throughout your configuration. So I'm going to use uComputing.local here, or let's say uComputing.net is fine. I'm going to use uComputing.net, right? uComputing.net, and I'm going to go OK here. So this name over here becomes the fully qualified domain name of this server, FQDN, a host name plus a domain name. So I'm going to go OK here. I'll leave the configuration at work group for now. It's going to restart the system, so I'm going to go OK here, click OK here, click close, and go for the restart. Okay, my server is up again. I'm going to press Ctrl to insert here and log in with my credentials. Once the server is restarted, the first thing that I need to do after setting my host configuration, that is the host name, the primary DNS suffix, and then the IP addresses, the next thing I'm going to do is to install the DNS server rule. Because I don't have any DNS server on this network. If you already have a DNS server, you can go ahead and install ADDS. But I don't have any DNS server on my network. I'm going to have my DNS server and my Active Directory domain controller on the same system. So Server Manager loads automatically when you boot a Windows Server operating system since like Windows Server 2000, right? So if you need to stop it, you can just come here and go to Server Manager properties over here, then check this box over here. Do not start Server Manager automatically at logon, and that annoying waiting time will not happen anymore. Okay, but it's not a problem because I need to use Server Manager here. So I'm going to go for add rules and features over here and begin my DNS installation and configuration process, because Active Directory is highly dependent on DNS. We need DNS for ADDS to work. So I'm going to go next here. Select role-based or feature-based installation, go next. I'm going to select my server name here, go next. Okay, so what I need first is DNS. I'm going to install and configure the DNS, test it and make sure it's working properly before I add Active Directory domain services. Some people decide to do it together, but setting up the DNS first, making sure everything is okay before I add Active Directory domain services always works for me. So I'm going to go for DNS server first, click add features here, go next, go next, go next, and click install. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to wait for the installation to complete, and then we're going to resume the video and do the configuration for the DNS. Okay, so once the installation is complete, I'm going to click close over here and then go ahead and configure the DNS server. You can use this option here to access the DNS server. You can also click on Tools over here and access the DNS Server console. So I'm going to click on Tools, go for DNS, and then we're going to begin a configuration process. Every DNS server needs 2 zones at least. Okay, you need to configure the forward lookup zone and the reverse lookup zone options for your DNS server before it works properly. Basically, the forward lookup zone resolves names into IP addresses, and the reverse lookup zone, that's the opposite of that, resolves IP addresses back into names. So we need to get all the 2 configured. We're going to right click on the DNS forward lookup zone over here and go to New Zone, and then click Next here. Now, the first DNS server that is set up on any network must be a primary DNS server. So this is the first DNS server. I'm going to make it a primary zone here. Go Next. And then I need to give it a zone name, right? The zone name has to match the primary DNS suffix that we set for our server before we began the installation and configuration of DNS. Do you remember? Right. I'm going to right click on Start here, and let's go to System and check. You can see that the host name over here for this machine is dc1.ucomputing.net, right? So the ucomputing.net option is the primary DNS suffix. So that's what we're going to use. It has to be the same, right? So I'm going to type here ucomputing.net and click Next here. Right, it's going to create a new DNS zone file. So, okay, I'm going to go Next, and I'm going to switch the radio button from this option to that option. Don't worry about the exclamation over here. It's just a warning, not an error. Okay, so I'm going to switch the radio button to allow both secure and non-secure dynamic updates to make sure that any resources that gets onto my network will be automatically recorded in a DNS zone without my intervention. Okay, so I'm going to click on Next here. Click Finish, and then I'm going to have 3 resource records when I click on the zone name. If you configure a DNS forward lookup zone and you don't have minimum 3 resource records, there's something wrong. You need to fix it before you proceed, right? So first of all, you're supposed to have an SOA record, an NS record, and an A record for the server that is running the DNS server route, right? As you can see over here, our server's name is DC1 and it's having an IP address of 10.0.0.1. Now we're going to configure the reverse lookup zone by right clicking on this reverse lookup zone here and go to New Zone. I'm going to click Next here. It has to also be primary zone. I'm going to click Next here. We are running on an IP version 4 network, so I'm going to click on Next here. And we need to put the network ID for our network, right? Now we are using a class A IP address, so the network ID is going to be 10 over here because our IP address we are using is 10.0.0.1, and class A IP addresses, the first octet decimal is the network ID, so you don't need to put 10.0.0.0, you just need to put 10. Okay, so I'm going to put 10 here, click Next. I'm going to make sure the radio button starts create new file. To create a new zone file for me, I'm going to click Next here, and then switch this radio button from here to allow both secure and non-secure dynamic updates. Okay, because I want my DNS zone to be populated automatically with resource records. I'm going to go Next here, click Finish. Now, after you finish configuring any DNS zone for the first time, you have to have minimum 3 resource records in each zone for the DNS server to work properly. As you can see, the forward lookup zone has 3 resource records, SOA, NS, A record, which is good, but the reverse lookup zone is having SOA, NS, no pointer record. Okay, now it has to be balanced. So why is this one missing over here? When I refresh, no help. Okay, so in order for the DNS server to work properly, we need to make sure the reverse pointer record for this A record is created here, right? So I'm going to just right click on the resource record over here, go to Properties, and then check Update Associated Pointer Record. Okay, this is one way of doing it, and the simplest way of doing it. When you click on that, you can just come to the reverse lookup zone and just do a refresh, and then we have a reverse pointer record for that A record here. Okay, now it's about time we test our DNS server. We need to test the DNS server, make sure it's resolving properly before we go ahead and deploy ADDS, else we're going to have issues. So I'm going to close the DNS console here and close. Okay, I'm going to come back to server manager, so I'm going to minimize the server manager, and then we're going to open command prompt. So I'm going to press on Window key plus R and then type CMD, right, and press enter. Launches my command prompt for me. Now to test whether my DNS server is working properly, I'm going to type this command over here, nslookup, and press enter. Right, now if everything is right with your DNS server, the fully qualified domain name of your DNS server has to come like this, right? Host name plus the DNS domain name space. So in case you finish configuring a DNS server and you run nslookup at the command prompt and you get the IP address of the DNS server with unknown over here, there's a problem. You need to resolve it. My DNS server is up and running, everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and deploy my Active Directory domain services. So I'm going to click on add rules and features over here, click next, select role-based or feature-based installation, go next, select my server name, go next, and then I'm going to check Active Directory domain services. This is what we need. I'm going to go next here, go next, and click on install. Okay, so once the installation completes, you can click on promote this server to a domain controller to begin the configuration process for ADDS, or you can close and use this flag over here, right, on server manager. So in case you close it by mistake, you can still click on this flag over here and then go for this option, promote this server to a domain controller. So I'm going to click here and it's going to pop open a configuration wizard for me, asking me to select the deployment option, right? I don't have any Active Directory domain controller on my network, so I'm starting a new forest from scratch. So I'm going to go for add a new forest here, and then I'm going to type the root domain name. The root domain name has to match my DNS domain name, right? So my DNS domain name is uComputing.net. I'm going to repeat the same thing here by typing uComputing.net. and then click on next here. Alright, now the next thing that pops up is the domain and forest functional levels, okay, and then global catalog. So what are these things over here, right? And what is this DSRM, whatever? Okay, so I'm going to explain all these things. Now, the forest and domain functional level basically helps us to set the versions of Windows Server operating systems that can work hand in hand with this one that I'm setting up, right? Now, this Windows Server operating system I'm using is Windows Server 2019, right? So if, for instance, I want to make sure only Windows Server 2019 and Windows Server 2016 domain controllers work on this network, I can set the forest functional level to Windows Server 2016 and domain functional level to Windows Server 2016. Now, if I proceed from this place, what is going to happen is that if, let's say, we have a Windows Server operating system that is running on maybe Windows Server 2008, I cannot use those operating systems as backup domain controllers for this one. This domain controller cannot replicate data to those domain controllers. So if I have older versions of Windows Server operating systems like Windows Server 208, Server 208 R2, Server 2012 on my network, and I plan or I have planned to use any of them as a backup domain controller for this Server 2019 domain controller, I have to set this functional level to a lower version of the Windows Server operating system so that I can have domain controllers running with previous Windows Server operating systems from Server 208 up to the latest, right? Now, when I set it too tight over here to Windows Server 2016, right, what is going to happen is that, as I've said earlier on, only Windows Server 2016 and Windows Server 2019 server operating systems can replicate Active Directory data with each other, right? Now, let's have a look at these options over here. Global Catalog Server. So basically, a Global Catalog Server or a GC stores a partial replica of all the objects that we have in ADDS. That is what it does. And the first domain controller that you set up on a network must be a global catalog server. That is the reason why this checkbox is not giving us the option to clear it. And this one over here is also not giving us the option to check it, because you cannot have a read-only domain controller whilst you don't have a read-write domain controller. So the first domain controller that you set up on your network must be a global catalog server and must be a read-write domain controller. Then later on, you can have additional domain controllers with read-only functionality. Right now, we have this option also over here called directory service restore mode password. Right, this password is not the password of this server. Right, it's not the password of this server. It is the password that is going to be needed when you are doing ADDS maintenance. Right, so when you type the password over here, you don't type and forget. You type it and document it somewhere. Right, somewhere safe, not a place that anybody can have access to it. Right, or you just need to make sure you remember it. Okay, at least, because when you forget this password, when you back up the Active Directory domain controller's data and you're attempting to restore, you're going to have problems, because you're going to need this password to restore a backed up Active Directory data. Right, so I'm going to just, you can use the same password as that of the system. It's fine, it's no problem. But what I want to tell you is that this password can be different from the system password of this machine. I'm going to click here and then just use the same password as that of this DC and click next. Now watch this. When you make a typographical error, the next button becomes deactivated. Right, so in case you finish typing your password twice and the next button is still not activated, it means there's a typo there, so you have to retype it. I'm going to click next here and clear this create DNS delegation checkbox. Go next here. It's going to give the system or the domain a net BIOS name, and then we're going to proceed. And then I'm going to go next here. I'm going to create also folders over here that is going to be used to store the Active Directory database files, the log files, and the Cisco folder. Right now, the Cisco folder stores group policy objects, so it's also essential. It's because of this folder specifically that we need an NTFS file system for ADDS. So I'm going to click on next here and click on next here. It's going to check and make sure that all the prerequisites needed for Active Directory domain services pass before it allows me to proceed. So as you can see, it tells me here with a green check mark, all prerequisites checks pass successfully. I can go ahead and click install to begin the installation. Now, should in case you get a red cross over here, you don't need to proceed. Your ADDS is not really going to function well, right? Because there are problems. So once you get a red cross over here telling you that the prerequisite checks failed, you need to go check your DNS server. You need to go check whether the system has enough storage space, whether the storage that is going to store the Active Directory database is formatted with the NTFS file system, and come and run the check again, right? So since mine has passed successfully, I'm going to click on install over here to begin the installation. Okay, once the installation completes, the system is going to sign out and restart your server automatically. So when you see this, it's not any problem, just allow the system to perform its restart process. Okay, so once the installation completes, I'm going to log in here for the first time as a domain user. I'm going to press Ctrl Insert here and then log on to the uComputing domain for the first time as a domain admin. As you can see, I'm no longer logging on locally anymore. I'm logging on to the uComputing domain. So I'm going to type my password. And then press enter to log in. So everything is ready. Active Directory domain services is up and running. How do you know ADDS is up and running? There's so many tools that are added to our server once you deploy an ADDS. Okay, so everything is set. Our ADDS domain controller is up and running. Active Directory domain services is running here, as you can see. Right, it's online. And then there are a couple of tools here that have been added for us, like Active Directory Admin Center, Active Directory Domains and Trusts, and a couple of things. But the tool that we're going to use most often is Active Directory Users and Computers, right? So as you can see, we have a domain up and running. We have users over here. So you can go ahead and add new users if your network needs it, right? So we're going to end it here. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.